This is Women for Gun Rights with your host, Amanda Suffecool, part of the DC Project.
So, hey folks, we are back. Welcome to another Friday night with another amazing gal in the fight for gun rights. And we just happen to be women, so it's Women for Gun Rights. It all makes sense. But it really isn't that we're fighting for gun rights because we're women. We're just fighting for gun rights and we happen to be women. And one of the amazing women that I'd like to introduce you to is Elizabeth Conroy. And she works for a family-owned company called Ohio Ordinance Works. And she is the chief compliance officer. And I ran into her at a couple different things. But frankly, it is the fact that she pays attention to the laws both in the United States and on an international level, working with the United States. And I just thought that this is something that was so interesting that you guys would like to hear about it. So Elizabeth, thanks for joining me on Women for Gun Rights.
Thank you for having me, Amanda. It's a special privilege. I call it a privilege because I get to talk with you and share things that people don't maybe get to hear that often because they don't hear it on the media, the good things about gun rights. So there's a lot of great things to talk about, and I'm excited to be with you tonight and dive into these subjects.
Oh, that's great. So first thing, let's talk about a little bit about what Ohio Ordinance Works does. I've had the pleasure of being at the factory, and let me tell you, it travels incognito. If you don't know it's there, you don't know it's there. And even if you know it's there, you're not getting in unless they want you in. So.
True. We do that on purpose. We do like to keep a low profile. We are a family business. My father started the business in 1982 out of his basement in Chardon, Ohio, and he started it based on a love for firearms and was manufacturing and going to gun shows, and he turned his passion into a business. And now we are still a small business, but we're up to about 85 employees. We do employ a lot of veterans. So we like to bring them in, and they do fit because they understand the laws, regulations already. They have a love for our country. They love the United States. So it's a blessing to be able to employ veterans. We currently manufacture firearms for the commercial market, rifles, and we also manufacture for the U.S. government as well as for foreign governments for their military. So there's where the importing and exporting comes in on that side. So we do a range of things.
So your company, Ohio Ordinance Works, actually builds both semi-automatic and fully automatic. And so there's a set of rules associated with fully automatic, though the politicians and the news people kind of blend those all together and act like, it's all the same stuff, and it's not. So there's nuances to the whole thing. So who can you build machine guns or fully automatic guns and firearms for now since, let's say, 1986?
Correct. Since 86, it's now only for law enforcement or for the U.S. government or foreign governments. When you manufacture a machine gun, it has to be registered within 24 hours to ATF, to the BATFE, and then we can only transfer it through ATF, their NFA branch, which is the National Firearms Act branch. They have to approve any transfer, which a transfer is possession from one licensed dealer to another licensed dealer or government, and they have to approve that. So it cannot go into commerce. It cannot go to private individuals. It's only for law enforcement or U.S. government or foreign government end users.
So when you talked about it to begin with, your father started the company before 1986. So when he first started, anybody that had the money for the licensing fee and had the money for the firearm could own one. And then, a few years into his business, all of a sudden the rules changed. So how hard was that to kind of absorb and start to restructure around?
Yeah, I don't know that it was that hard. It just changed the focus and where they were going to spend their time in manufacturing. Because correct. So maybe just to go back a couple steps, we are a federal firearms licensee holder. So we are an FFL dealer. We deal in firearms under our license. We manufacture firearms under license. We also have an importer license with ATF. So we're registered for all those things. We're also registered with the U.S. State Department as a broker and as an exporter and manufacturer. And we're registered with the Department of Commerce under the Bureau of Industry and Security. So we are licensed across the board. You have to be for these things. And it's not a small thing, and you pay for each license. And then, of course, you have to follow the rules and regulations that each license comes with. So that's right there is a big thing in and of itself, no matter what kind of firearm, rifle, handgun, shotgun, machine gun, you have to be licensed to to do business, and in the gun world, to say.
Well, and following the rules, as you say, I mean, because that's one of the things about, we'll say, firearms owners as a whole, ex-criminals, but firearms owners as a whole, is we're card-carrying, rule-following good guys. And the laws and the rules associated with firearms ownership and all of the nuances, it's printed on tissue paper on a book that's like 2 inches thick, and they're like, here you go, learn this. So you are the chief person who had to learn this for Ohio Ordinance.
Correct. And I'm still learning. I mean, actually just went to my COO of our company and said there's a training compliance seminar in April that I'd like to attend, because there's so much to learn. It's ever changing. So I've been doing this position since I started from my father in the year 2000. And I believe in 2001 is when I was given the opportunity to be the compliance manager at that time. And he said, it's going to take you 2 years to learn this job. Well, 21 years later, I'm still learning the job. I'm still teaching, training, applying these things. You have to. I mean, with any business, you have to stay on top of it, whatever industry you're in. It's true. You never can stay just, relaxed in it. So I'm still learning the regulations, and there's been changes in even what agency regulates which firearm parts. So not even the gun in itself, but just parts of certain firearms went from State Department to Commerce. So now we're looking at those laws. So I have to learn that and bring it back to my company and apply those things too.
And there's so much. And then every time they pass another law, it's like a shift, and they may or may not tell you in a timely manner. And so you've got to kind of keep your ear to the industry, so that as you hear a whisper of something, then you got to go ferret it out to figure out exactly what that does and how it impacts your company.
Yes, absolutely. It is our job to go out and find the information and apply it. It isn't just, like you said, there's this book of all these laws, and suddenly you're supposed to know them and live by them. So we're part of the NFATC, the National Firearms Act Trade and Collectors Association, who represents industry, and that represents people who are firearm owners. We're part of the NSSF, the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We attend the conferences that they hold in DC on a regular basis. Orchid Advisors is another one, and Fair Trade Group. They are a group of people actually on the board of the Fair Trade Group for firearms importing regulations. So all those, they make up of industry members are made up, but it brings us a voice to the table to go talk to ATF and State Department about the regulations that either that they just passed or ones they're talking about passing, and how it will affect the industry. So we do have a voice amongst all those different organizations out there, and you have to. So you have to be involved. You
have to. And kind of keep your thumb on it a little bit. So I personally think that we dodged a huge bullet, if you will, when David Chipman was not made the head of the ATF. So what's your thoughts on that versus?
I don't know if I can say this, but we were praying that he wouldn't get in. I mean, there was prayers on because he was very outspoken against, again, the law-abiding citizens of firearm owners. The things that I believe he would have put in place were going to hurt the people that are the good guys, the people that own many firearms and they have it legally. And so I'm thankful that, we did dodge a bullet. We did.
We did. So even though the current head of the ATF is a temporary position and has been a temporary position for, 7 or 8 years now, it's sort of the devil you know versus the devil that you were getting to know, I guess is that piece of it. But wow. Yeah, we were all watching and waiting just to see what that would be. So the ATF has the strength and the ability to determine laws, and specifically they have the ability to reinterpret laws. So how does that impact you? The stuff that they're doing right now with like the binary triggers and the stuff that they're doing with the modifications. Let's say everybody's heard the term bump stock. What are those things? How do those reinterpretations affect you and the business at Ohio Ordinance?
Well, they affect us deeply, but I'll give you an example. In May of 2021, they came out with a proposed rulemaking to redefine an actual firearm frame or receiver. So again, they're going to take these regulations that have been in place for, many, many years and change it. And in there was, and I'm sure people have heard this term, ghost guns. It's a ghost gun. a receiver that's not complete, hasn't been serialized or marked yet. And so they actually came up with a new term called a PMF. What is a PMF? A personally made firearm. Because you're allowed to go out and buy and put together and assemble a firearm. You can't sell it. You can own it. And so when that came out, they have a comment period. So anyone, whether you're a citizen and any individual, can go on and comment. You don't have to be just a dealer or an FFL holder. They received over 200,000 comments on this proposed rulemaking. So that was our chance as an industry and as a country to go on and give them our opinion. Now, some opinions said, this is stupid, this stinks, it's ridiculous. Well, those comments don't help ATF.
Right.
My company, we put together a 3-page letter of why the changes they were suggesting were not, I'm going to say not even not good. They were going to hurt the industry. They weren't going to help public safety, because that's ATF's stance, is we're here to ensure public safety. Mm-hmm. Well, these changes had nothing to do with public safety. They had to do with some different court issues that happened and court cases that came up, and now thought we need to change everything. So that was our time to put our 2 cents in, and we did, and many, many companies did, and did a thorough job at it. And they're still going through all these comments. So the comment period closed in August. We're in February, and ATF is still thumbing through it. It hasn't come down because they were such great opinions and great facts presented to them, and they can't blow it off. And I actually met with them at the SHOT Show in Las Vegas, the firearms attorneys from ATF, 2 in particular, and they said, we're really taking this seriously. We're looking at a hard look at what information not only your company but others gave us, because we realize it's going to impact the firearms industry deeply. So I will give them some props that they're not rushing and they can't rush their agenda in this moment, because so many comments were given. And they have to look at each one, and they have to meet and talk about each one. So we do have a chance. And there was another one for the bump stock one that came out too, another proposed rulemaking. I'm not sure how many comments they received on that one.
And they actually stopped comments early on that because they'd received so many, and then pulled back, and so that's you're making a very good point about the fact that as a private citizen, all of us have the ability and the responsibility to send in a comment and a thought. But it is not helpful when you call them names, or you start with swear words or name calling or whatever, because anything that you say after that, which may have value, has been discounted. So if you start with, did you know, or my belief is, or these facts are, or this data supports, then they give your comments credence and consideration. Yes. But it's sort of like when you start any conversation. If I start it with, you know what's wrong with you, pretty much the other person, whoever they are, is turning their ears off, and they're done with that conversation. And so, but we have a responsibility when the ATF opens these comments up to comment and show them that we're looking, that we're listening, that we care.
True. And give them facts behind it. Like, I think take the emotion out of it, which is hard to do. I get emotional sometimes when I see these things or hear it on the news, and it's really all negative talk about the gun world, because I'm living the other side of it. I'm living the legal side of it every day, all day long. And so I come with the facts to the table, whether I'm talking to somebody from government or not, or just a private citizen that may not like guns. Come with the facts and the details, and take emotion out. And you can be passionate about something, but not emotional, like you said, where you start off with a degrading comment, because that's not going to get you anywhere.
It doesn't get you heard at all, no matter what. And I was at a table, and it was actually at SHOT, and so I'm talking to like-minded individuals, and they immediately started into this diatribe of things, to the point where I'm on your side, and my ears turned off, because I was done with whatever it was that you had to say. I'm open to learning, but when it's turned into this lecture without conversation, it was like, you've lost a window here where you could have engaged in a manner to where then we could have featured it on a show. We could have done, there's so many things that happen. But instead, it was like, I don't think I need to hear any more that you have to say, because your mind is not open or flexible even in discussing, to cause the other person to understand.
And I will say, kind of stand up for ATF for a moment. That's 90% of the time that's what they receive from people. That's what they hear is the negative things, is the people just coming in there attacking them. I do have a great relationship with many of the people at ATF. Many are local ATF agents. We just had a compliance inspection. Some of them were out at our factory for several weeks in the fall, checking. That's what their job is to do. Their job is to show up and make sure I'm doing my job and following the law to the letter of the law. And so moving forward to NFA branch and to headquarters DC, they have a job to do. I get it, and I know many of them, and we bring situations to them, and they've been very helpful over all of my years. So we have a good rapport because our company's been around so long. I believe we have a good name in the business. I'm thankful for that. My father has built our company on certain morals and beliefs, and he says the Bible says a good name is worth more than silver and gold. So we want to have a good name, and we do have a good name with ATF, and that's why they'll hear us and listen to us. And so the people that just come flying off the handle, I don't blame ATF for just saying, no.
It doesn't help, because when you really think about it, there are a lot of the people who are employed by the ATF who said, I am pro-gun and I want to make a difference, and there's a lot of them who've joined the ATF because they've heard about government overreach, because they've heard about ATF overreach. And so they were like, if I get involved, I'll know that my area does not do that or is not part of that. And so they're on your side inherently until you chase them away.
Right. True. That's very true.
So let's talk a little bit about legal transfer of a firearm. And what's the difference between something that is a Class 3 or an MNFA item versus just a standard, I want to inherit something that was in the family?
There's a couple things. So when we're talking about a semi-auto or Title I firearm, that is a handgun, a shotgun, a rifle. Under handgun comes pistol or revolver. So really it's those three categories. And obviously there's different calibers and models, but really you only have those three. And those being semi-auto, we as a dealer can ship it out of state to another dealer. And then if they have a customer, let's say we send it to a dealer in Florida, and everything is logged in and out of your bound book. That's your record keeping that we're required as manufacturers and dealers to hold. And then a person comes into that gun store and does the background check, the 4473, clears the background check, and can take that firearm. Now that person can't ship it out of state. They can only ship it to a dealer. They can sell it to someone local in their state, but they can't take it around and go selling things at gun shows. You have to be licensed for that. So in our state, in Ohio, we don't have an open storefront at my factory, but many storefronts are there. Same thing, you would come in and do that 4473 background check and pay for your firearm. We have to keep those records. ATF, when they come and inspect us, they look at those very closely to ensure that we've completed everything perfectly. And if you don't complete things right in an inspection, you will get written up. That's another maybe topic, but go from there. So it's to ensure that we're doing things correctly. So that's a firearm. So Amanda, if you wanted a handgun that I have in my inventory, maybe you saw it on our website, you would make an appointment, come to my office, do the background check, pay for the firearm, and then you leave. The handgun, it has to have a lock on it. You cannot you can't travel with ammunition with the firearm. It have to be kept separately, and you can leave, and now you're responsible for that firearm. And there's also many laws in place that say you can't sell it to someone who is not allowed to own a firearm. So who's not allowed to own a firearm? Someone who's had a domestic violence charge, someone who is a user of drugs, someone who has been dishonorably discharged from the military. There is a slew of laws of people who can't own those firearms. Now you as a private citizen, say you bought a firearm from me, those laws still apply to you. So if you've got a crazy uncle and you know that, let's just say that he has a domestic violence charge, you cannot sell him or give him that firearm. If you do, you're liable. It's up to 10 years imprisonment and $250,000 fine. So those laws are out there. They're out there for private citizens as well as federal firearms license holders.
Well, the interesting thing is that in the legal world, they call that operating a firearm under a disability. They're disabled from owning a firearm or handling a firearm or having a firearm in their possession. And when they say that, there's so many people who think operating a firearm under a disability, that means disabled people can't have guns. So if I have a cane, I can't have a gun. And it's like, that's not what that word means. It means that you cannot, the laws have regulated you in a manner to where you are very aware that you are not allowed to have a firearm. And they make it no secret. So it's not like, oh, I didn't know. You know.
True. And the media paints it as a picture that's a bad one. They're going to just that people are just selling guns to all these people that shouldn't have them. That's not the case. Fortunately, what I found is someone that's set out to do evil or harm will find a way to do it no matter how many laws you've put into place. That's the sad part about things. But the law-abiding citizens that acquire firearms legally, keep them legally, you don't, there's no problems there. But going back to one other thing, let's just say when my father passes away, he has these firearms. They're in his estate. His executor or executrix of his estate or administrator of the estate now has the authority to dispose of these and liquidate the estate legally, and ATF will follow that process too. So there are those situations that you can't just go around, giving guns to whoever you want. There is a legal process for that. And one of the things that our company has done over for many, many years is help mostly widows that call and say, I've got these guns, what do I do? And we're like, okay, here's the process of how to liquidate the estate assets of firearms. So there's another side of that.
And liquidating the estate while retaining the value of those assets. Because years ago, my radio partner, my brother, and I had started to do a thing called the appraisal fair to give people an idea of guns that they might have inherited or guns that they've had for years and what its value is. Because while we were doing a radio show one day, we had a gal who called and said her husband had passed away and she had these guns and didn't know what to do with them. So she called her local police station and says, I have these guns and I want to get rid of them. What can I do with them? And they said, well, you can bring them here. So she took the entire collection of guns to the police department because she thought that that's what she was supposed to do. And they took custody of them and she went home. So the problem with that is that she could have benefited from the value of them, from the resale of them. So going to a gun shop and selling them on what's the word? Not commission, but consignment, that's the word. So selling them on consignment, or just straight out selling them, or going to an auction house and having them auctioned so that they all legally transfer, yet you get value for them, because so many people don't know the value of an estate's worth of firearms and what that could be. And so if you've got somebody who's got multiple firearms, they're worth hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. And why give
usually
it away?
thousands. And
Yeah.
and if mostly these widows, their husband was a gun collector, he was a gun guy, so he has many guns is normally the case. And some give them instruction, here's what to do when I pass away, here's who to call. And we've had many widows that call and say, my husband told me to call Bob Landy's at Ohio Ordinance when I die. And that's the call I get. And now they're emotional. They've lost their husband, and there's all this paperwork, just the legal court system of an estate, whether there's firearms involved or not. And now we have this. And so we walk them through that process and are happy to. And it's not even the monetary value. I mean, it is the monetary value because they're worth a lot of money, and some of them are machine guns, and there's a way to transfer those correctly. But it's also, for our part, is preserving the history of those firearms. There's some that are rare firearms. There are some that are collector's items, and just keeping that in commerce instead of you destroying or abandoning them, because you don't have to do that. Now that they've gone to a police department, they'll probably never leave that police department. So, gosh, a collector could have had that in his collection, and that's kind of the part that we look at. Is we know people collecting certain items, and we see them in an estate. We know just the right buyer that wants that special item, and it's fun to see them get that, because if you collect, whether it's cars or whatever kind of knickknack you collect, everyone wants their collection to be complete and whole and have that nice piece in it. So that's the exciting part of our part. Not only we get to help a widow with a hard time, and she does get to get the money, and then we get to find a great home for these firearms. So that's, people might sound silly when you're talking about guns, but it's really the case.
I think it's not silly. I think it makes a lot of sense. Recently, this is kind of a two-part story. Recently in the news, they had a gun that had the provenance that traced it to be Sammy Davis Jr.'s personal .45 ACP. They got it in California in a gun buyback program, and it was slated for disposal. So they said, oh, well, we need to destroy it. It's worth $300. the NRA Museum tried to acquire it, and California wouldn't let them, and they actually destroyed it. But frankly, with the provenance that it was tied to Sammy Davis Jr., who really was one of the premier firearms handlers. So he and Jerry Lewis were like trick shooters, and they practiced and they did amazing stuff. They did all their own stunt work in the movies, and these were the guns that was one of the guns that he used. And so that gun is lost from history forever because of someone with an anti-gun agenda looked at it and valued it at $300, and so they didn't deem it worth saving. And when the museums come to them and say, please let us have it, buy it, acquire it, preserve it, we'll take it out of circulation, and they still won't. That doesn't mean that they're doing anything except headed for trying to erase guns from the earth.
Right, correct. Because at that point, again, ATF talks about public safety all the time. So that wasn't a public safety issue. You have a museum wanting to buy it, preserve it, have it there on display. That's not going to hurt the public, and yet you're still going to destroy it just because you want to destroy another firearm and want to, kind of, yeah. And I'm sure that could have been a $10,000 firearm. It could have been more if it went into an auction house somewhere and got sold to their dealer. I think it would have gone for much more than that, actually, just because of, like I said, who owned it. So it's sad.
It really is. And so the provenance to it was just amazing. I mean, we did a whole show on it because it was like $300. There would have been 3 million people that would have stood in line with $300 to be able to buy that gun. It was that kind of a thing. So okay, so
I could talk a little.
Go ahead.
Just one more thing on provenance, just for people who are collectors of firearms and the machine gun side of things. What's very neat, in 1968, when you had to then register the firearms, many firearms were brought back from World War II and different things. And so when we buy collections, we see that paperwork from that IRS registration form back in 1968. And these were a lot of, all these soldiers brought back these firearms and then registered them legally. So we have the documentation from 68 up until, let's just say, 2021 of transfers and the history of those firearms. So when people purchase a machine gun, and we can even talk about that, how they do that, they're purchasing something that, maybe a German MP40 that was brought back from Germany legally, registered in the United States legally, and has been transferred and owned by collectors over these past many years. And so there's history and provenance there. And they're not cheap firearms. So the people that are buying them, they may never shoot the gun. It may just be in their gun room, but it's part of their collection. And that's the NFA world. That's also, I think, very special too.
Well, and I think that, a machine gun, frankly, has value to a couple different groups of collectors. And that's when you get that crossover collector. So it's the people with the military stuff. It's the people who are tracing like a German company. There are people who are just gun people. So there's multiple different paths that will take you to something that has value and then take you back out of it. So
Yes.
how do you transfer a machine gun? Walk us through the process, because the news makes it look like you can just walk down the street. Right next to the store that sells cupcakes is the store that sells machine guns, and everybody can have one.
So let's just say we have a Thompson, a Colt Thompson model 1928, 30 caliber. Their value right now is around $30,000, give or take, depending on the condition. And so you want to buy that firearm, great. You came into some money, you're like, I want to take my money, invest in a firearm, because these NFA firearms hold their value, because, like you said, after May of '86, they could no longer manufacture. So whatever was registered and manufactured up till then, the value goes up because there's only a certain number of them. It's called the NFR and TR, the National Firearms Act. It's their registration, their bound book, that every machine gun is in this bound book that ATF holds. So there's only a certain number of them. So if you want to buy it and you have the money, we transfer it to you on what's called an ATF Form 4. And you have to get fingerprint cards and your photographs. We fill out the forms. We have to notify your CLEO, your chief law enforcement officer. We mail it in with transfer tax to ATF. It's about an 11-month approval process time. Once those transfers are approved from my company, Ohio Ordinance Works, to you, to Amanda, then I call you, come pick it up. You still fill out that background check. It's a machine gun. There's still a 4473 involved, and you get to leave with that firearm. And you have a piece of paper with an ATF tax stamp on there, and that gun is registered to you by serial number to your name. your address. You're the only one who can have it in our possession. Now, someone could shoot it if they're with you, but it is yours, and that's it. And you have it legally until you decide to transfer it. And so everything is approved from ATF. It all goes through ATF. Any movement of that firearm, it
Right.
can't be handed to someone else without their
All of
approval.
that.
And that 11-month process time.
There's the 11-month process time, and that gun cannot move around without its paperwork with it. So
Correct.
if I'm going to the range with it, I have to take that packet of papers. And then when I take it back and put it in the safe, the packet of papers goes with it. So I can't just,
Exactly.
oh, well, I'm just taking the gun, I'll leave all the stuff, I can get it later. That's not how this works. That's not how any of that works.
Correct. And we often recommend people, so you got that original transfer with that blue tax stamp. We always say, keep the original in your safe or your folders, keep a copy with the gun, in your gun case, wherever you go shoot. And if you're allowed to take it out of state, so if there's a show that you want to go to or a big shoot, different states, you are allowed to, but you have to get a transport paperwork approved by ATF. You have to tell them when you're taking it, where you're going, how you're traveling with it, and they'll approve you leaving the state and keeping it in your possession. So let's just say you want to drive to Colorado and go to a shoot out there this fall. In the spring, you'd submit that paperwork to ATF, asking them their permission for you to move with that firearm. You're going to drive out there and have it with you. They approve it, and then you have to return with that firearm back to your state.
So how long
So
does
any movement of
how
that
long
firearm.
does that take to get permission for you and your gun to go on vacation?
I would say it's probably 2 to 3 months. They're still pretty backed up and slow right now with things, so it's not going to be a month turnaround time. So that's what I'm saying. If you knew you were going somewhere in October, which we all kind of plan our trips ahead of time, I'd say in the spring get that approved because you put the dates of travel on there also. So it's very specific when you're traveling, where you're going, name and addresses, and that firearm by manufacturer, model, caliber, serial number is on that form. So that's your transport form as an individual to take your firearm and go shoot it somewhere else. So let's just say your uncle has a range in Florida and you want to drive down there with your gun and shoot. That you would fill out that 5320 transport form.
Darn, I want
Now,
an
there's
uncle like
paper-
that.
There's papers for everything. There is paperwork to cover everything, every aspect of machine guns and where they go.
So every time
There's a
we listen to the news saying, this guy had a machine gun and that guy had it's like it is the most regulated portion of the firearms industry that there is. And it isn't just willy-nilly, and people aren't just
No.
loosey-goosey with it. It really is super regulated, and they keep a hard eye on it. So
They do. And even for repair firearms, can I talk about that for just a moment?
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
say you have that Thompson and you want to send it for repair, there's a way to do that. But even licensed dealers, we have a firearm coming in for repair, and it has to be approved from ATF from this one dealer to me for repair. It's called a Form 5. So until that's approved, that dealer cannot ship that gun to me. Once they get approval, they ship it to me. I log it in my bound book. It's tagged. It's not my property. It's in my possession, but it's not my property. So there's also that. It's ownership and possession. I don't own it, but I'm possessing it right now. And then I have to get ATF to approve that same Form 5 for the firearm returning back to its original owner. And once the approval comes, then I can ship it back to them. So any movement of an NFA firearm is ATF is approving it on both sides.
So
no,
is
things
it
are not just
a couple months to move it in and out for repair also?
yes.
Wow.
And that's even between licensed dealers. So yeah, nothing happens fast. There's no quick turnaround. there is some, they do have, I will give, again, ATF, I will give them credit where credit is due. They have ATF e-forms, which is online now, so we can submit certain things online. And some of those go very quickly. When I register a firearm, when I go to submit to a foreign government that's already been approved by State Department, then ATF approves it. It's about a 24-hour turnaround time online because it's an online process. So that does help when you're trying to move things and move product and get paid for all
Get
your
paid
work.
for your
That does help.
product.
So
So let's talk,
finally, so you don't have to wait.
let's talk a little bit. When I was there was a crate of a shipment that was waiting for paperwork. So let's talk about something that ships, let's say, outside of the United States. And what do you have to go through for them to order from you, for you to get permission to manufacture, and then to ship back out of the United States?
So there's in every country, in all NATO countries, there's they have their own police forces. Usually, their police forces. We think of our police. Their police forces is more like our army or their special forces. So they have police forces, and they want to purchase. Let's just say it could be 5 guns. It could be 500 guns. We get all kinds of quantities, but we'll just say 100 for the sake of discussion. And they purchase 100 firearms. they are required to submit to us a purchase order, an end user certificate from that government saying, we want to purchase these 100 firearms from Ohio Ordinance Works. This model, let's just say OOW50 BMG, a 50 caliber machine gun, for the use of this to be put on our tanks for border security. So this end user certificate is very detailed of why they want the firearms and what they're going to do with the firearms. Then they have to submit a DSP 83, which all the different parts of their government sign off on for State Department. And then an import certificate. So their country, pick a country, they have to apply for an import certificate and provide that to the U.S. State Department, showing that they're allowed to import these guns into their country. U.S. State Department, I submit that paperwork. It's called a DSP-5, which is an export license. That could be approved in 2 weeks to 2 years, depending on the country, depending on the product, depending on the price. State Department does their due diligence. They do a blue lantern check. They go to that embassy in that country. They go to that foreign government and ensure that all the documents Ohio Ordinance Works submitted are valid. You did buy these firearms. You do want them. It gets approved by Department of Defense, Political Military Affairs, several other agencies under U.S. State Department or in U.S. State Department have to sign off on this license. When it's signed off, I get it either approved with provisos, might be an RWA, return without action if there's something missing that I didn't attach and to resubmit, or deny. Deny means, no, we're not shipping to this, we're not approving to this country, and they'll give a reason. I've only ever had one denied in all this time. Based on human rights, there's kind of an uprising in the country, and they just said, we're not going to export right now. So it's looked at very closely. Once I have that export license approved by the U.S. State Department, I can now submit to ATF, here's my 100 serial numbers and a copy of that license, and it's going to the police forces here. And then all those documents have listed our freight forwarder. That shipment, that crate you saw, that is allowed once all the approvals happens, it's allowed to go to the freight forwarder. They legally can have it in their possession. Just that one freight forwarder. If I didn't list you on my license, you can't have those firearms in your possession at any time. They clear it with U.S. Customs, and then it goes on an airplane and lands and goes right to that end user directly. And there are times we have to report back when it landed and that it got there, and get a letter from them and go and report it back to State Department. So there's a very, I summed it up quickly, but
checks and balances.
A lot of checks and balances there. They're there. Mm-hmm.
So as a company, when do you start the manufacturing in that process? Because there could be denials, there could be delays. You've got a lot invested. When do they transfer money to the point where your investment is not, your company is financially not at risk?
Mm-hmm. We require a deposit, so it depends on country or size of the contract. So it may be 30%, and that because obviously raw materials are so expensive now. So getting in the materials, so let's start making the parts. We've never had a shipment that wasn't approved, because we only deal with countries that are, I would say on the approved list under State Department, and it's the same probably 10, 12 countries that we export to and our repeat customers and what they're using them for. So we built that in place where we've got a deposit down so we can start buying the product. Of course, pay our employees. We take it very seriously. Our 85 employees, we call them, my dad says we have 85 families to take care of. And it really is, because everyone there has got a family. They've got a wife and they've got kids. And so we need to make sure we're doing our best to keep those 85 families, on the up and up. And so with that deposit, we'll get that. And then when there's usually upon shipment and receipt, then they pay the balance. So we've kind of refined the process over the time, and it's good. So we haven't gotten stuck. No, there's been a couple things, but maybe it takes a little longer sometimes. But it's like any business, so
You're like, ooh, okay, let's hope they speed this up, right? Because that's the thing you're looking at. So many companies don't get paid until it ships. At least there's pieces and there's milestones and they hit certain things. I just was curious about that. I know it's something new that I've not really had a lot of experience with, and so I find it extremely fascinating. So what other things do you want people to know about? Frankly, when I went to visit you, I think you and I and one other gal were like the only females in the building, maybe. So
we only.
So talk about.
There's three of us. There's myself included. 3 women in our business. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how about being a woman in a man's world? What's it like there?
Well, I think it's great. But maybe because I grew up in the gun world. I think my first time shooting, I was 4 years old. My dad took my sister out and gave us a Chipmunk 22 rifle, and to shoot at pop cans. He said, if your business was in the house at that time, there was firearms everywhere. I don't want you to be afraid of these or scared of them or curious. You want to go shooting? Let's go shoot. And so we did. So I've just always been around firearms. We used to go to gun shows. My sister and I would sleep underneath the table and laying on the rifle cases because we were exhausted. So we just grew up and we thought it was so fun because you'd go around the gun shows and find little neat coins or collector things like, what could we buy at the show? That was fun. So I just always grew up in the business, and I never thought, woman or man. It didn't. I knew just great people. And most of the people in the gun business, like my dad had been around since the 80s, a lot of husband and wife teams actually. The husband does the buying and selling, the wife runs the payroll and the paperwork of their little gun shop, the little mom and pop shop. So I grew up knowing a lot of great, actually, couples in the industry, my father's friends and their wives. Mm-hmm. And I'm the oldest of 5. There's 4 girls. My brother's the youngest. So my dad had girl. So it was always girls and just would always bring us to the gun shows. And finally, my brother was born. And now he's the president of our company. And he is just blessed with engineering and design in our company. So I never felt that divide because I grew up around it. And so I honestly had great experiences, which might not be the case for everyone. And when I started going to DC to conferences, I'd say I looked a little different because I had blonde hair and I like sparkly things. Like, I love your pink sweater you have on. And so I would show up, ATF's always in black suits and like black shoes. And here I was like high heels and a little sparkle. And, my dad said, could you tone it down? I'm like, well, this is me. Like and so I might have had this look of that I didn't quite fit the bill or fit the ATF world. Like, what's she doing here? Until those times where Q&A came and I would raise my hand and ask questions and ask them respectfully to ATF and ask, I had legit things that were happening in our business that I need to know what to do and how to do this and what, can you tell us this? So every conference I'd go to with ATF and they started to see, okay, she might have blonde hair, but there's some brains behind there. So I think, and I'm fine with earning that title of, okay, you might look like Barbie sometimes, but there's actually some meat behind there. there's a brain behind that. And so, because I think with any job, do you know what you're talking about? I mean, you could fake it till you make it, but I think I was happy to prove that I've been working hard learning these things and studying them and trying to figure out this compliance thing at Ohio Ordinance. And so if you know what you're talking about, you earn respect, whether you're a man or woman. It's I think like
you're right. I mean, it's that thing to where once you start to treat everybody like they're people, not just whatever, it starts to all click and go together. I tell people that I think the gun world is sort of like the manufacturing world was 20 years ago. It's slowly shifting, it's slowly changing. When I went to engineering school in the 80s, there were 3 women in the entire engineering college. And now I think the mix is probably 60-40 or 40-60. It's that kind of a thing to where it's not a novelty and it's not a uniqueness. It's just the norm. And I'm seeing that in the firearms world now. How about you? You've been going to gun shows and you've been going to like SHOT Show and the industry shows. So do you think the profile and the face is changing a little bit?
I absolutely do. And I agree with that 60-40. That is a good ratio for that too, because that's just at SHOT Show in January of this year, of 2022. All the companies, whether they're just making boots or backpacks or making firearms or making accessories or making, any kind of gear. Yeah, there's a lot of women working and running these things. And like I said, I still know a lot of that are husband and wife teams doing everything. And yeah, I'd say that's a good mix. And it's changed from, I don't know, the women part of it, but like I said, well, let me go back for a minute. ATF used to be just all males too. I noticed that too. So there was 6 of the 7 agents that inspect us were women. So even in that, on that compliance side there's a lot of women that work for ATF and they're power women. They've been doing it for years. There's one that's been there for 30 years and she's been inspecting us for the 20 years I've been there. So it's longevity. If you're in it and you know what you're doing, you'll last in this business as a woman.
And okay, that makes a lot of sense. So where do you think the industry is going to go in the next 10 years? What changes do you think you're going to see?
Yeah, I mean, technology, just because even now the way we're manufacturing firearms and the technology side of things is just booming. And it's not that it's hard to keep up with, it's expensive to keep up with it. It's very expensive. We also have a barrel division, so we manufacture our own barrels for firearms. And, just the equipment, the training, the upkeep of these machines is so expensive. So I think it will weed out the smaller mom and pop places, sadly, which, I say that sadly because that's where we started, was very, very small. And we didn't intend, I don't think that we're large, but we do a lot in our location. So for having less than 100 employees, we really do wear quite a few different hats. But we started small, always want to kind of maintain that small family business. But to stay alive and to compete with the bigger companies, we have to grow and we have to spend the money on research and development. And so certain companies that can't do that, they may fade away. Or they just, even after the pandemic, because they took away their livelihood. There were some people that didn't have the money to buy firearms or just stopped. And there was a lot of FFLs that closed down, which was sad because they were just doing it as a side business and then they could no longer afford the rent and afford trying to keep things going without that income stream anymore. So I think you're going to see a lot of bigger companies and the small ones might fade away. I'm not sure. I hope not. I could be wrong, but it's just, like I said, more technology. If you're starting to make firearms using these certain, the 3D printers and all those things, and they are expensive. You're talking $2 million for a 3D printer of a certain size to make certain firearms and everything that comes along with that cost. And that's just for one machine. How do you compete with that if you're a manufacturer?
Yeah, there's a lot to that. On the on the smaller businesses, part of it is they were considered non-essential, so that they were starved out by, they still have to pay the rent, they still have to pay the utilities. They're still trying to pay their employees, and yet they couldn't sell anything. And then the industry went to a spot where there wasn't product available. And so even if they could be open, they couldn't get anything. And they'd cleared the shelves and there just wasn't anything available. And so how can you stay in a business when your shelves are completely empty? And so with our ammo shortage, at the same time our guns were flying off the shelf, it really started to starve the industry, I think.
It did. But on the other side, that's interesting, as we're thinking our sales of our semi-auto rifles boomed in the past year. I mean, last year was a record year for us. And we have a semi-automatic BAR, a semi-automatic HCAR, which is a tactical version of the BAR, and a semi-automatic 50 caliber that can be all owned by the public. And those, they're pricey. I can't afford one. I mean, I'm looking at buying my daughter a car. She's 15, she'll be 16. I thought that's the price of a car. So, and there's still people there's certain groups that do have the funds and are buying. So I'm thankful for every sale that we make, but sad for the companies that did have to close their doors because it was, a side business that they would attend to and they weren't essential. You're right. So they had to shut down.
So I think we're gonna see a shift, a kind of a change in the dynamic, a shift in the next couple of years, just as everything resettles and reopens and new things kind of emerge. And there were so many people buying things that anything that a gun manufacturer could manufacture, somebody was buying. With the riots and the news and this fear and the fact that you're locked at home. And so if your connection to the world was the news cycle, and the news cycle was 24-hour fear, it sort of changed all that. So it cleared out everything that was available. So companies could either start to work on R&D for a new product, or they could just keep making what was selling. And so they did that. So I think that as it starts to pause a little bit, the things that people were thinking about as new concepts and new ideas and new research is going to come about. And I think that's where we're going to drive some new changes in the firearms world, just because we hadn't for a little while.
I agree. And kind of going back to that proposed rulemaking we talked about with ghost guns, when ATF, they said they look to post that June or July of this year. They can't talk about what's in it. When I met with them at SHOT Show, several people, all the deputy directors and chiefs at an FA branch, and they can't discuss it yet, but they said, we're still reading through it, but we'll have something. So we don't know what that's going to be like. What will ghost guns be? Will it be, that will change all those parts kits and things where people are buying or selling their own firearms. So until we know what ATF stance in that ruling that comes out in June or July of this year, that I think that'll drive different things too in the industry. Because there were several companies just making those 80% receivers. That's what they did.
Right.
So that's going to affect them a lot. And I wouldn't be shocked if that even got pushed to later in the summer. If it comes out in June or July, I might be surprised because they're still slowly going through this process. So maybe by the fall. But whatever that ruling says will affect our industry as a whole.
I think you're right. I think that is, and then you're going to have to see how they interpret that and how far-reaching it is, because they can't, if they can, they shouldn't. But if they say something about non-serialized firearms, then it could be far-reaching to pretty much anything that was manufactured before 1968 that the manufacturers weren't required to put serial numbers on. So they can't, they can, but they shouldn't restrict things that historically you were allowed to have. And now all of a sudden, because of this, they're going to scoop that into this bucket with these. So it's
Yeah.
going to be unique as they try to navigate through that.
It will be. I don't think that they'll go back. It'll be from this date. Let's just say, June 1st, 2022. From now on, it has to have this markings on it. Now, there's already marking requirements of firearms, but these personally made firearms that they now have an actual terminology, the PMF, there's a whole set of regulations and rules that a citizen will have to follow. So if they buy this receiver and they buy the parts kit and assemble it, they're going to take it to a dealer. This is how the language is now, and have someone engrave the required markings. Well, that poses several issues. Now, does that person have to log it in their bound book? What are you going to charge? What all markings do you have to put on it that are different from a manufacturer's requirement? So that will all be stated in this rulemaking that comes out. But
right, because they have to have unique IDs, so they have to have a unique serial number. So does that mean that there's a national database of unique serial numbers for them to pull from? Because what do they do, and how do they keep that from everybody using the same, EXP1, right?
Right. Well, and just interesting, the serial number part, as a manufacturer, as a federal firearms licensee manufacturer, there's a law that we cannot duplicate a serial number of a firearm we manufacture. So there's obviously a lot of serial number ones
Right.
out there, but all of my firearms, we can't have a serial number 1 M2 or a serial number 1 240 and a serial number 1 BAR. They have to have unique. So there is a regulation for that. So then my question comes, well, I'm not making this firearm for this person, but now you're asking me to engrave it for them and be part of that manufacturing process. So there's some things that are going to have to be worked out, and I think it'll ATF will see it once they put this rulemaking out. And unfortunately, it's too bad that we can't talk to them about it right now, because I think I said we could put more input into making this
As to what they're thinking, right? Yeah.
better for the whole industry. But so we'll see. But it's things like the NFATCA and the Fair Trade Group, where we do go with NNSSF, we meet with ATF, we talk about it, so they can also come out with not so much new rules, but letters to clarify that rulemaking, as time goes on, they see how it, affects the industry. So that's why it's important to have the seat at the table and have those discussions with ATF and keep those lines of communication open with them.
Yeah, seat at the table is really, really matters. So it's going to be an interesting year to see what they say in this whole ghost gun category, to see what the Supreme Court says about Bruin versus New York State Rifle and Pistol Association and the far-reachingness of that case. So and then what comes from there. So 2022 is going to be, I believe, a historical year in the firearms industry.
I believe that too. And every year is, to be honest with you. When I started working for my father, and I did it just because I was in college and needed some money, and okay, he said, I'll give you a job. And I started working for him. And I always loved law and the legal side of things, but didn't really want to go to school to be a lawyer because I just didn't want to put in all that time, to be honest with you. And when I started doing the compliance side, there was so much with the law and learning and changing. And every year was different. And every year is a big year. So it will be this year. And every year has been ever since I've worked for him.
It's gonna be interesting.
Keeps it interesting, which keeps it exciting. Like there's never a dull moment with ATF and with guns.
There is not. Well, this wraps up our show. I have to say it's gone really fast. Elizabeth, I want to thank you very much. So how can folks get to Ohio Ordinance Works to see some of the stuff that you guys build and to check out your website?
Yeah, our website is, you can do OOWinc.com, which is Ohio Ordinance Works Inc., or just Ohio Ordinance Works. Check us out. We got some great videos on there, even YouTube videos. There's so many people that post great YouTube videos of them firing our guns, because once they get them and they see, I'll be honest, just to tout us for a minute, our manufacturing process and the employees that we have, they do such an amazing job. They take such pride in their work. We do things 110%. We don't shortchange anything. We don't cut corners. The quality product we put out is impressive. It's impressive to me because I'm just doing the paperwork. There's people that are making these things, and so there's some great videos on that. And then our Instagram page, we post some our products, and it's cool because you'll see a whole rack of all these firearms that are being manufactured or receivers in our house, and you'll see some of that, what's going on, and we're about to roll these guns out, and it's exciting. So you take a look there, and if you're ever in the Ohio area and you want to tour of our factory, you can call us and make an appointment. Like I said, we're not an open storefront, we're appointment only, but we've got some, we'd be happy to host and let you see, and if there's something you want to buy, you can buy it. And we also do sell on Gunbroker, because like we talked about those collections we get from widows, we do post on Gunbroker, and of course we ship to a licensed dealer and sell through there. So there's some other odds and ends, handguns, shotguns, revolvers, some cool things that we don't make but we sell. So,
yeah, you guys do
thank you
some
for the
pretty
opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. This was so educational, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to reserve the right to call you back. And so, as laws change, as things do, we'll have you back and we'll talk some more. So,
I look forward to that.
Okay. Well, folks, we'll be back next Friday with another amazing woman from Women for Gun Rights, because we are involved and we're making a difference. We'll see you next week.